Welcome back to Askewed Reviews, and this week I'm doing the remaining films in the Mel Brooks collection. Today was also a viewer request, and it was for the 1993 film Robin Hood Men in Tights. Here is your trivia question for today. Latrine's name was not always Latrine. What was it originally? The answer will be at the end of this episode. So in the movie Robin Hood Men in Tights, we meet our main character, Robin of Locksley, who is currently imprisoned. But due to meeting a friend named A Sneeze, the two of them are able to break out, and then Robin heads back to his home of England. Once back, he does manage to find and befriend A Sneeze's son, A Chew. They then head back to Robin's home of Locksley Hall, but once they get there, they realize that it's being towed away as the taxes have not been paid. Luckily, Robin's blind servant Blinken is still there and manages to tell him about what's been happening. Since King Richard left for the Crusades, his evil brother Prince John and the Sheriff of Rottingham have taken over and are now overtaxing the people. Robin then introduces himself to these two, explaining that if they don't stop with the taxes, he will cause the villagers to revolt and fight back against them. It's during this meeting that Robin ends up meeting Maid Marian, who he instantly falls in love with. Now, of course, Prince John and the sheriff refuse to stop the taxes. So, can Robin actually turn these villagers into a band of merry men that can finally stop the prince and the sheriff so that he and Marian can live happily ever after? For this film, Mel Brooks was the producer, director, and one of the co writers. He also managed to have a small cameo as the character of Rabbi Tuckman, who of course is just a Jewish version of Friar Tuck. This film is of course primarily a parody of the Kevin Costner Robin Hood Prince of Thieves film, but there are also a lot of references to the classic Errol Flynn Robin Hood movies. Robin Hood Men in Tights was not the first time that Mel Brooks would do a parody of Robin Hood. He also did a 1975 television series called When Things Were Rotten. In this, Dick Van Patten plays the character of Friar Tuck and would also appear in this film as the Abbot. Cary Elwes plays the character of Robin Hood for this film, and I honestly can't imagine anyone else doing as good of a job as he did. By the way, the reason he was chosen to play the character was due to his performance in the film The Princess Bride. What's funny is when Mel Brooks offered Elwes the role, he actually thought it was a joke and hung up on him the first time. Also, in case you were ever curious as to why Cary Elwes says the line about being a Robin Hood who can speak with an English accent, this is specifically a dig on Kevin Costner and his performance in Robin Hood Prince of Thieves, where he couldn't do an accent. Amy Yazbek desperately wanted to play the character of Maid Marian, but when she saw the casting call, it mentioned they wanted a British, blonde, buxom woman. As she fit none of those categories, she decided to, at the very least, stuff her bra for the audition. The character of Achu is played by Dave Chappelle, and this was actually his theatrical film debut. Chappelle also got that fun line of being able to reference one of Mel Brooks's other films, as when Robin puts him in as the new sheriff, everyone is confused about him being a black sheriff, and that's when, of course, Achu says, "Well, it worked in Blazing Saddles." Roger Rees plays the character of the Sheriff of Rottingham, and is absolutely one of my favorite parts of this movie. Richard Lewis, who is also another great casting choice, plays the character of Prince John. And if you didn't know, the whole gag about the mole that keeps moving around his face is sort of a nod to the same similar joke that Igor had about his hump moving around in Young Frankenstein. Another great casting choice was Tracy Ullman as Latrine. By the way, if you didn't know, they of course planned out the sequence of the sheriff falling through Latrine's roof, but the whole scene where they're on the bed together was completely improvised by Ullman and Rees. One of the actors that has some of my favorite lines throughout this film is Mark Blankfield, who played the character of Blinken. Now, I know him from somewhere else, but I'm wondering if anyone else has ever seen this movie. If you haven't, go check out Jekyll and Hyde Together Again. It is such a weird movie, but he's so good in it. Eric Allen Kramer plays the character of Little John, but they originally offered the role to Hulk Hogan, who ended up turning it down. By the way, if you happen to recognize Kramer, it might be due to the fact that he plays the father on the Disney Channel series Good Luck Charlie. Matthew Peretta plays the character of Will Scarlet, or his full name, Will Scarlett O'Hara, which, if you didn't know, is a reference to the film Gone with the Wind. Interesting fact, by the way, Peretta would actually go on to play the character of Robin Hood in the 1997 series The New Adventures of Robin Hood. An actor who's appeared in quite a few Mel Brooks films, Dom DeLuise has a cameo as Don Giovanni. Also, though, DeLuise's wife, Carol Arthur, has a cameo as one of the complaining villagers. Robert Ridgely plays the hangman in this film, but he's technically reprising his role of the hangman that he did in Blazing Saddles. Here's a random fact that I didn't know. Ridgely is actually the voice of Thundar the Barbarian. Patrick Stewart makes a cameo in this film as King Richard. There's a rumor that apparently there was talks of potentially having Sean Connery come in and reprise his version of King Richard from Prince of Thieves, but this time around, apparently he would have done it in drag since this was a parody. The reason why they didn't go this route is supposedly Sean Connery was asking for too much money. Another brief cameo in the film is Isaac Hayes as a sneeze. Also, character actor Brian George appears as the dungeon maitre d'. Another actor that commonly shows up in Mel Brooks films is Rudy DeLuca, who also happens to write quite a few of the films alongside Brooks. This time, though, he's playing the party guest who manages to sneak a peek at some of the women. These two villagers right here are actually Nepo babies. The one on the right happens to be James Van Patten, the son of Dick Van Patten, and the one on the right is David DeLuise, the son of Dom DeLuise, who you might also recognize as the father on the Disney series Wizards of Waverly Place. Many people have noticed this, but just in case you never have, the magic pill that Latrine gives the sheriff to bring him back to life is actually just a lifesaver's mint. The sequence where all of the knights fall down like dominoes actually took several weeks to prepare, mainly due to the fact of figuring out the angles and, of course, which ones were going to be fake and which ones were real people in the suits. Now, you may not have known this. There are some moments which are much easier to tell than others, but none of the actors actually do any of their singing parts in this film. So if you haven't seen my History of the World Part 1 review, you may not know this, but the song that they use for Men in Tights is actually just a recycled version of the song used in the segment Jews in Space. In the sequence when Robin Hood and Achu are trying to rally the troops, they both give speeches. Robin's speech is based off of Winston Churchill, while Achu's is based off of Malcolm X. Just in case you were wondering, even though the film takes place in England, the entire movie was filmed in California. So when it comes to the film Robin Hood Men in Tights, to this day, this is still one of my favorite Mel Brooks films. I laugh every time I watch it, and it's so very quotable. I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 5. And if you enjoyed this film, other movies I recommend checking out are Monty Python and the Holy Grail, The Court Jester, Zorro the Gay Blade, and Yellowbeard. Now it's time for the trivia question from the beginning of this episode. Latrine's name was not always Latrine. What was it originally? So when Latrine is talking to Prince John, she explains that her name wasn't always Latrine. It used to be Shithouse. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Askewed Reviews, and if there's a movie you'd like to see get a review, just mention it in the comments.